Welcome back. A controversial take on the grisly murder of Jamal Khashoggi, Washington Post columnist, in an op-ed for The Federalist. Our next guest wrote the following headline: "Crocodile tears for Khashoggi betray info op to promote his fellow Islamists." Benjamin Weingarten, senior contributor for The Federalist, joining us now live here. Benjamin, good to see you. The media paints Khashoggi as a journalist who was brutally murdered for his critical reporting. But if I understand this correctly, you say the media is not really telling the entire story. What is the story and why isn't it being told?
Yeah, those are the two essential questions. And what I argue is that the media is not telling the full story about Jamal Khashoggi for two reasons. First of all, this portrayal of him as a sort of freedom-fighting dissident in exile who is a critic of the Saudi regime is not an accurate portrayal or the full portrayal or context of his life. This is someone who was a mouthpiece for the Saudi government and essentially, it seems, had a falling out with the competing faction in the House of Saud, led by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, who is now in charge of the kingdom. This is someone who was apparently a Qatari operative while he was writing as a columnist for the Washington Post, and it appears that Qatar, via a think tank, ended up feeding him a lot of the articles that he was working on for the paper. This is someone who has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood extensively and has supported the Muslim Brotherhood's agenda, who mourned the death of Osama bin Laden and also expressed dozens of anti-Semitic comments publicly throughout his life. So I believe that it's far more accurate to think of Jamal Khashoggi as a political operative who is engaging in information operations on behalf of anti-Saudi regimes under cover of being a Washington Post columnist. And that's not to justify what happened to him, because his grisly murder is terrible, but it is to say that we need that full context if we are going to completely recalibrate our relationship with Saudi Arabia and other Sunni Arab powers as well, potentially on the basis of the Khashoggi murder. And the second point about the disingenuousness is that there are all sorts of people who fit the exact idealized portrayal of Jamal Khashoggi in terms of freedom-fighting journalists who are persecuted by governments from China to Turkey to Iran. And how come we're not talking about recalibrating those relationships as a consequence? The story explains itself. The broader argument is that Jamal Khashoggi, as I noted, is being used as a justification for downgrading the relationship with Saudi Arabia, which was the linchpin of the Trump administration's effort to build an anti-Iranian bulwark led by the U.S., Saudi Arabia, other Sunni Arab powers, largely secular authoritarian regimes, and Israel against Iran. The Biden administration, on the other hand, is completely appeasing and caving to Iran and downgrading relationships with our former partners and allies.
All right, there's a lot of claims inside of there about Khashoggi. Just want to remind everyone, Newsmax hasn't independently verified any of the claims. This is an op-ed that I'm discussing with Benjamin here in this one particular piece. You also say the goal of President Biden's Middle East policy is to punish our partners and reward our Islamist adversaries, and that Khashoggi's death is being used as part of the information effort to support the administration's agenda. What brings you to that conclusion, Benjamin?
Yeah, so let's be clear also. The reason the Khashoggi story now is suddenly back in the headlines is because the Biden administration, with no reason to do so, but for what I suggest, I believe, is it released a Directorate of National Intelligence report which assessed about a one-page report, really 1 to 2 pages of actual text, assessing that it was likely that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called the hit, essentially, on Jamal Khashoggi. But it's not backed with any new intelligence. There are no new major revelations or insights for the American people about this. And basically it says, look, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was in charge of the kingdom. Those in his circle or close to his inner circle were reportedly involved with the murder of Khashoggi. But it doesn't provide any new evidence or intelligence to provide a highly confident assessment that he was involved with the murder. All of which is, again, not to justify it, but it's to say, why would you dredge up this report that doesn't tell us anything new right now? And if you look at the series of events, the context here, the Biden administration has said explicitly it wants to recalibrate the relationship with Saudi Arabia. It does not consider Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman the head of Saudi Arabia. It has frozen arms sales to Saudi Arabia as well, while on the other hand, Iran is now enriching uranium reportedly to levels far beyond what was allowed under the Iran deal. They are engaging in attacks against U.S. forces or U.S. assets in the Middle East, particularly in Iraq. Its proxies, it appears, have done so on several occasions. And the Houthis continue to engage in terrorist acts in Yemen. At the same time, the Biden administration is removing the snapback sanctions on Iran from the UN, is also removing the terrorist designation from the Houthi terrorist group as well, and has said that it wants to come to the negotiating table with Iran to renegotiate a new Iran deal without preconditions. So you take all of these events, essentially browbeating Saudi Arabia and downgrading that relationship, while at the same time seeking to come back to the table and appeasing Iran, even in the face of its aggression. I think it leads you to come to my assessment, which is that we're punishing our partners and allies and we're rewarding our adversaries. Iran being the chief one, the leading state sponsor of terror in the world.
Let me get this last question in here. I got a little time left. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is reportedly moving forward with a $500 billion mega city. The news comes just after a U.S. intelligence release last week found the prince approved that operation to capture or kill Kashoggi, which you pointed out earlier on, who had criticized Saudi policies in columns for the Washington Post. What do you make of the timing of the prince's decision on that? About 30 seconds for you.
Yeah, it appears that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is confident that even though there's this downgrading by the Biden administration, ultimately cooler heads will prevail. And there also has been reporting out there that there's an effort to develop a sort of Arab NATO, potentially in alliance with Israel, to counter Iran. So Saudi Arabia is doing what's in its national self-interest, regardless of what the Biden administration is doing, and calling its bluff.
All right, I'll leave it right there. Benjamin Weingarten joining us live from the Federalist. We appreciate it. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.